So my name's Dr. Ron Williamson. I'm actually a Great Lakes Indigenous archaeologist. I work out of Toronto, Canada. My work focuses on the relationship between various Indigenous peoples in the Great Lakes region. There's a very curious phenomenon when Europeans first arrived, which was that there were Iroquoian-speaking groups that were surrounded by Algonquian-speaking groups, and these two language families are considerably different. They're totally unlike one another. So you had people living in the Great Lakes for 4,000 years who were completely different people, yet archaeologically there were events that relate to economy and that relate to the adoption of language that we've had to try and sort out based on archaeological data. And we're now applying linguistic data, we're applying recent research with MT and autosomal DNA, and we're trying to figure out just how flexible and fluid those borders were 4,000 years ago. A colleague of mine is also looking at a specific case in southwestern Ontario where there are groups that are linked to Algonquian people in Michigan and in kind of the northeast states, and their direct interaction with people that are assumed to have been Iroquoians literally about 1,000 to 500 years ago. The interesting thing is that when we go back and we look at this 4,000-year-old case, we're not sure of the ethnicity of the people in this case study, even though they have different material culture and they have different, and they're expressing that in various ways, and there's a mixed material culture in this little borderland zone area in southwestern Ontario. So we have a chance to look at that, but now that we're looking back 4,000 years, we're seeing just how complex it is. So when I think of the work, for example, that Victor Conrad's been doing at Akwesasne and Letitia Riviere, that work about the complexity today at Akwesasne, I feel like reassuring them that complexity existed 4,000 years ago throughout the entire Great Lakes region, when you had people who were forming into confederacies, you had people who were still yet independent nations just at the community level, and two completely different language groups and genetic mixing of the population that just added to that complexity. We're very interested in participating in the border study. Victor Conrad invited us because I think he appreciated that complexity in border contexts and complexity in borderlands is not new. It's something that has been around for thousands of years. And when we think about borders and we think about sovereignty and we think about how people identify both at the individual level and as groups, we realize that in certain areas in the distant past, in the ancient past, there was huge fluidity in how people identified themselves, and it could change in a very dynamic way very quickly. And that's reflected in the material culture that we study, but we're now seeing that reflected in other ways. And one of the ways that that's very relevant for Indigenous people today is in assertions of sovereignty, assertions of territorial rights in traditional territories, and our ability to help and to work with collaboratively with First Nations in order to assert that sovereignty and assert those rights is completely in keeping with, for example, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. So I think of this border research actually as contributing to the ways in which we can reconcile our past as a nation.